Was peculiar, but she was my best friend. She lived in my childhood home, but she wasn't my sister. She wasn't a cousin, a family friend, or anything of that sort either. She had been there for as long as the house had existed, maybe longer. She never spoke about the time before that. For as long as I knew Lila, she hardly changed. Her age was fluid, but not like most people's. When giving me advice, she seemed slightly older than me. When doing things that annoyed me, she seemed slightly younger. Her long black hair floated loosely around her head as if she were underwater. I never heard her footsteps or saw her walking anywhere. She was just always where she needed to be. When she got cold, her teeth chattered so loudly it made my skin crawl. Lila was always cold. The more I learned about the world, the more I noticed things that reminded me of Lila and helped me understand her. Have you ever stroked a lizard or a snake? If you pet it from head to tail, it feels incredibly smooth. But if you go against the grain, against the direction of the scales, it feels rough, unsettling, and wrong. That was how Lila's voice sounded, like stroking against the scales, like a voice played backward. Lila didn't have a right hand, but it wasn't like an amputee or someone born with a disability. If you traced your eyes from her shoulder down her arm, her limb grew thinner and thinner, but it never fully disappeared. Looking at the space where her right hand should have been made me nauseous. In high school, I learned about asymptotes, lines that approach zero, but never actually reach it. Lila's arm was like that, infinite, but practically non existent, always approaching nothingness. I know what you're thinking. I had an imaginary friend, Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation is usually correct. Usually. Lila was made entirely of impossibilities, and of course, no one else ever saw her. When I occasionally invited a friend over to play, Lila would hide. When I talked about her, my family would get uneasy. You're scaring us, they'd say. Please stop. I learned not to mention her to others. How did I know Lila was real? Simply put, I had to know. Lila was my only true friend. She was my connection to the world and the foundation of nearly all my childhood memories. If Lila wasn't real, then real meant nothing to me. When my parents argued, I'd grab my flashlight and crawl under my bed. I found myself under there often. Lila was always there. Without realizing it, I'd peel paint off the baseboards as I vented, talking about the struggles of a middle class, comfortable life. Lila, meanwhile, would draw. Her drawings weren't good in the traditional sense, but they made me feel things. And isn't that what art is? One day, I decided to draw something for Lila. I spent hours on it. It was my masterpiece. When I handed it to her, she looked at it and frowned. "What is this?" she asked, without really asking. "You and me on the Great Wall of China." I had always dreamed of traveling the world with Lila. She tore the drawing into pieces and scattered them on the floor. "You know I can't leave this house." A lump formed in my throat. I wasn't sure if I felt ashamed of myself or sad for Lila. For some reason, one thought came to mind. What if they tear this house down? She looked frightened. Why would they do that? I shrugged. Doesn't everything get torn down eventually? Then I'll slip down the bathtub drain. There's a reservoir nearby, isn't there? You said so. I'll swim there. Can you swim? I asked. If I have to. The next day, Lila gave me a drawing. I'm sorry, she said. Your drawing was beautiful. I shouldn't have torn it. In her drawing, a red sedan sat in the center. A man was in the driver's seat. The door open. It was me. Grown-up me. Outside the car was Lila, her hair wild and flying, even in the drawing. We were waving at each other. I pointed at the blue background surrounding the image. Are we in heaven? I asked. Maybe. From that day on, I couldn't help but think about Lila slipping down the drain whenever I took a bath. I often dreamed of following her. Maybe they were nightmares. I could never tell. One day in high school, Lila appeared in the corner of my room. What are you doing? She asked, looking at the cardboard boxes scattered everywhere. We're moving, I said, avoiding her eyes. I'm sorry. No, she said. You can't go. It's not up to me. My dad got a transfer. I'm still a kid. Officially, I mean. Will you visit? She asked. It's far, I answered. How far? Across the country. What am I supposed to do? I didn't know what to say. I pushed my bed aside and lifted the loose floorboard. When I reached for the stack of her drawings, Lila grabbed my wrist. Without taking a step, she was suddenly closer, 10 steps closer. If you're going, the drawings stay, she said. It wasn't a request, it was an order. Why? If you take them, you'll have no reason to come back. Reluctantly, I agreed and left the stack buried under my bedroom floor. As I finished packing, Lila cried. We never spoke again. Today I'm older, as people tend to be. I'm engaged to Sarah, the most loving and supportive person I've ever known. I've mentioned Lila to her a few times, but like everyone else, she doesn't like it. You should consider seeing a therapist, she once said. You talk about her like she was real. That upset me. I've never had an issue with therapy. Honestly, I think it would help me a lot, but it was the implication I didn't like. When a business trip took me back to my hometown, I felt a cautious excitement. The airport was less than an hour from my childhood home, and the first thing I planned to do was visit Lila. I'm sorry, sir, said the car rental agent at the airport. We're out of SUVs right now. She pointed me toward a red Toyota Corolla, and I remembered Lila's drawing. I laughed. Would you like me to find you another car? She asked. No, I said, still smiling. This is perfect. The nighttime drive to my hometown was uneventful but filled with nostalgia. I passed the quiet country road through the woods where my dad used to take me camping, my favorite barbecue restaurant, and the reservoir where we spent our summers. When I entered my old neighborhood, my chest tightened. One of the houses had been demolished, leaving behind piles of dirt and the skeletons of massive new mansions under construction. When I arrived at my childhood home, I took a deep breath. The house was still standing, but caution tape surrounded it. A backhoe sat idly in the driveway. There wasn't much time left. I was surprised to find the front door unlocked, but when I stepped inside, it was clear why. There was nothing of value left. The rooms were bare. Even the carpets had been stripped out. I immediately called out for Lila, but there was no reply. I started in the basement, where I used to sit with her and talk about school, about what it was like to leave here and go elsewhere. Now, there were only concrete walls. The posters of my favorite bands and video games were long gone. I moved back upstairs, searching the kitchen, the living room, the laundry room, looking for any trace of her or proof that I wasn't just a delusional kid with an overactive imagination. I climbed the stairs and checked my parents' old room. The fist-sized hole in the wall was still there, unfixed. Finally, I reached my old bedroom. Like the rest of the house, it was empty. I didn't need to move the bed to find what I was looking for. The loose floorboard was slightly raised. If you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't even notice. I pried it up and found dozens, maybe hundreds, of rough sketches. It was all real. It had always been real. Tears streamed down my face as I flipped through the pages. Me and Lila, looking out at the woods from my bedroom window. Me and Lila, playing checkers on the living room floor. Nostalgia overwhelmed me as I sifted through the drawings, and after a few minutes, I shoved them into my briefcase and hurried out to the rental car. The last thing I needed was to be arrested for trespassing while chasing after my imaginary friend. I got in the car and drove out of the neighborhood, heading toward my hotel in the next town. As I crossed the reservoir bridge one last time, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. Her long black hair floated gently around her head as if underwater. She was too close to stop. When I opened my eyes, I was in an unfamiliar room. A bright white light above me made it hard to see. A dark-haired figure hovered over me, and a familiar voice spoke. "Sweetheart, are you awake?" The voice was soft, smooth, not against the grain. A normal human voice. I was at once relieved and disappointed. "Rachel," she called out. "Can we get a nurse? He's waking up." She stroked my hair. "Oh my God, honey, I thought I'd lost you." A nurse rushed in and started asking me questions. My name, the current president, things like that. Didn't she already know? "What happened?" I finally asked. "You were driving over the Lockley Reservoir Bridge, and you crashed. The car went into the water," Rachel said, her voice still trembling. She looked like she couldn't believe I was conscious. "My briefcase," I said. All I cared about was the proof, the evidence that Lila was real, that I wasn't crazy. "Do you have it?" "Don't worry about that, sweetheart," Rachel said. "We can replace anything you lost. I'm just glad you're okay." Grief washed over me as I closed my eyes. All those drawings were gone. All I had left were my unreliable memories. A police officer I hadn't noticed before stepped closer to the bed. Unlike Rachel, he didn't look relieved. "Sir," he began, "we need the name of the woman who was with you." I was confused. "I was on a business trip," I said. "I wasn't with anyone. I was just visiting." "Honey," Rachel interrupted, her face filled with uncertainty. "The man who found you, he said you weren't alone. He said a woman pulled you to shore, a woman with one arm." My chest tightened. "Where is she now?" was all I could manage. "Well, that's the thing," the officer said, cutting back in. "After making sure you were safe, she left. And, he said she went back into the water."